Okay. Okay, what I did for starters is I just set the PowerPoint through the chat. So if you want to have a copy, I just sent it. We'll probably send it again here once we get more lateness coming through. But I just set the PowerPoint, so everybody should have that now. So you can go ahead and download it through the chat. And I'm going to go ahead and move my stuff over here. I think I am sharing. Can everybody see my screen? I am going to just go ahead and blow it up. I guess before I get too far, I'll just quickly sanity check. Everybody hear me okay? Everybody see the PowerPoint? Everybody have the opportunity to download the PowerPoint, who wants to, etc. It sounds like everybody's more or less okie dokie on things like that. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So I'll go ahead and move over here to the next slide. Actually, before I get into the agenda, I will bring a caveat to this. My very first one is, hey, good to have you all. Everybody's welcome. Please, everybody stay. You know, everybody's welcome here in Hanging House. But in any case, everybody's welcome. But I will point out that when we targeted this date, you know, between CASAS and TAP, I will point out that the official target audience for this webinar are the far northern agencies. We did a statewide webinar in September and another one, I think, mid-December that was definitely for everybody. We opened this up to everybody because that's the nature of online registration. And hey, if you're really eager, it's great to have you. But I'll just say again, we're definitely, the reason why we're doing this is because we wanted to have something for the far north. And I think everybody kind of agreed doing that region in person just is a lot more difficult than doing Bay Area or Sacramento or Central Valley in person. It's just a little too far flung. So for this region, we kind of had to admit, hey, this one just has to be online, whether everybody likes it or not. So again, everybody's welcome, but we are looking to get input from far northern agencies. Mostly this is the same accountability everybody else is hearing, but there are a couple slides, you know, where we're looking for, input. And in particular, you know, there were a couple things where we got some input from some of you in the far north. We know, and we also know that, you know, there's a lot of issues that you have, you know, a little bit because you're far flung, a little bit because you're rural, smaller, all kinds of issues where there's just things that come up typically with some of the more far-flung rural agencies in the far north that, hey, if you're in LA or Sacramento or San Diego or whatever, really isn't as big of an issue. So I'll just say, hey, you know, San Jose, Bakersfield, Oxnard, you're welcome, but just know we're going to talk about kind of, hey, what happens at smaller rural agencies, and we're going to go out of our way to do that. Just saying that may not apply to you, but that's kind of an on purpose here for this session. I'll stop talking about that. Back to the agenda. This agenda, the same agenda as our other statewide webinars, same agenda as some of the in-person. I'll also note a few of you I know were in some of those in-person trainings we've been doing here lately. Good to have you back. I do think a lot of the ones we've done have been really successful. It really has been good to hear from everybody. My big victory declaration with the in-person trainings, I think mostly relates to, we had a little list at CASAS where we kind of thought these were problems. We kind of thought there were some other things that were going well until COVID hit, and then they became more like problems. The more we hear from agencies, you know, the more it seems like a lot of the concerns agencies are having are not exactly the same, but definitely very similar to, what we thought. A lot of you have come to me and talked about problems with CAEP reporting. Some of that relates to things like workforce prep. Some of it relates to things like short-term services, but a lot of things that, hey, CAEP accountability, I think a little more so than we owe it to, maybe more of a boots on the ground element. You know, I'll just say the same thing I've said at all the in-person sessions is I kind of feel like statewide COVID data collection wise, When you look at the WIOA side, everybody was still attuned to payment points. Everybody miraculously still managed to do a really good job with pre and post testing, even though it was in the middle of a pandemic. I'm sure some of you don't want to detail how you did it, but just about all of you did get it done. Again, things like payment points, EL civics, everybody did pretty well and remarkably well, all things considered. But hey, once we get a little more detail oriented with things like bubble boy slides, occupational skills gain, short-term services, that's where that other shoe kind of dropped. And the superstars, not the ones that were lagging, the best of the best are the ones that came up and said, yeah, there were definitely some challenges with this. So on some level, we're kind of hitting the reset button and going over basics. On some level, we're really trying to figure out what are some of the issues, what do we need to tighten up. A couple of you brought up in emails to me about LAO. A lot of that discussion has been happening. That really has triggered a lot of really good discussion on, hey, we need to look at this probably more earnestly. Would love to hear what you have to say about this. You might want to hear some of these issues, though, before chiming in. So we'll do a programs update. This will be where we make up time. I'll talk about the same sort of things as the in-person trainings, but it will be consolidated, but some real basic overview things to get everybody's foot on the rail, as well as a little bit of a reset button, some things we were talking a lot about when we were doing the road show in 1819, some things that have come up here more recently, more kind of an update on current events. We'll try to be brief. That's what we also mean by review of key training issues. Some of you were around when we did a lot of those webinars back in 2018-19. If you were, you remember the same questions always came up. So pointing out a few of them that still seem relevant and still seem kind of, problematic for some. We'll talk about that. And then we'll do an overview of outcomes and services. We definitely don't have time to look at every single outcome and every single service. So don't worry, we'll spare you on that. But we will give you the overall overview of that structure. We will point out some of the highlights, again, not pointing out all, but picking out a few of the outcomes and a few of the services that tend to generate questions the most. Try to point out why they're confusing to a lot of people or what some of the trouble spots are. Hopefully give you a chance to bring that up as well. Do the same thing with services. Got to say services is an area that people have been mindful about, but reporting was really difficult during COVID. Sometimes I think you were doing them, but recording it is difficult. Some of you are more like, hey, give me a break. It was a pandemic. So some of those counseling, situations just didn't really happen during COVID like they would in a normal time. So we'll go over that, encourage you to tee up and come up with all the problems or tales of woe you can think of. We really want to bring as much of that up as possible. And then it will really be flummoxing to those of you that are new. We're bringing the brand new stuff up in the middle. Some love that, some don't, but I kind of feel like getting the overview and getting everybody's feet wet with CAEP kind of is helpful. And then, okay, now we've got CAEP and WIOA really the same. When we were doing the road show 4 or 5 years ago, that wasn't true, but that is a kind of another one of those funny things happen on the way to the forum issues is, hey, we're out of COVID. And all of a sudden, a lot of these things we've talked about in WIOA 2 accountability, really 99.9% the same for CAEP accountability. So we'll show what those are, talk about some brass tacks with things like entry and update record, quarterly data and that sort of thing. This is not a TE training, but we will spend a few minutes at the end, at least going over a couple of those biggies, making sure you at least know a couple of those report titles. And then that last bullet is solely for your viewing pleasure. There's about 20 goal setting slides. There's no way on God's green earth we'd make it if we do anything other than nothing about that. But hey, you've got it in the PowerPoint, and I'll just point out, it feels like eons ago, but in the spring when we were doing CAEP training, we spent just about all of our time talking about goal setting. Hopefully all of you remember, and you remember that you have goals. And that is everybody, as far as I know, is required to set goals at the agency and consortium level on or before June 20th. And April, May, it felt like a pretty big stinking deal. Now that it's, hey, the following January, it feels a little closer to forgotten. But hey, we will show you how to set goals, ways to use TE to establish and measure goals, lots of good ways to verify progress, all kinds of good stuff for your viewing pleasure there. So I'm sure that table setting was way too long, but I will just kind of stop and say, hey, hopefully that sort of kind of relates to what you were expecting to get yourselves into here this afternoon. It looks like the number of participants has stayed solid. I haven't had anybody, it doesn't look like anybody's run to the hills yet. So that's good news. Number one, I guess. It looks like it just upticked from 58 to 59. All right, anybody with any comments? Everybody's staying, eerily quiet here. Uh-oh, that doesn't sound good. All right, well, we'll keep talking. So we'll start with a real basic overview again, some basic level things that we really feel we need to kind of talk about. So this was really a big deal, I would say, more when we were still a BG. It still applies with CAEP. That is the basic statewide structure. We have 71 regional consortia. The consortia are based on community college boundaries. It's done that way because the legislature says so. We've got the 71 consortia. Again, the college boundaries typically a lot larger geographically than K-12 boundaries. I don't think there's any K-12 districts that have multiple colleges, but your typical college boundary usually has multiple K-12s. So for those sort of practical considerations, it's based on community college boundaries. And the way we have it set up in CAEP land is we have what we call members and what we call partners. If you're a member, congratulations. You're cordially invited to the consortia, whether you like it or not. That means you're a college district, K-12 district, county office of ed, a few ROPs I think fit in that formula as well. That is, if you're a college or K-12 district, you're part of your own regional consortia, whether you like it or not. You're a member, you need to participate. Congratulations. Every consortia also has the option to bring in partners, and a lot of you have done that. You bring in your Title I agencies, some libraries, jails, CBOs. It's really up to you. A lot of you in your communities have had regional organizations that feel like they should have a seat at the table. The way the legislature is written is it's up to you, the consortium, to decide this. If you want to stick to your college and K-12 districts and leave it at that, that's okay. If you want to reach out and bring in a bunch of partners, that's also okay. Again, the legislation just stipulates if you're K-12 or community college, you're there, like it or not, and then you have the option to bring in partners. Here's the nifty little map that kind of shows how that's outlined. Looking at program structure from a completely different lens, here's the structure based on instructional programs. So here we have 5 programs. Some of you that know the system really well start scratching your head about now and wondering why it says 5 instead of 7. I'll just say it's more of a superstar question than a new person question, but there is a little bit of a difference. This is how it's set up in Nova. Nova or CAEP land is set up to kind of roll up the programs. It's really set up to have these 3 super programs represented at the top of this graphic: ABE, ESL, and Career Tech Ed. I'd argue the other 2 that you see here, Adults with Disabilities, Parents K-12 Success, nobody could really quite slot them into these 3 big areas, so they're kind of floating on their own. But Nova's structured to streamline it to the maximum extent possible to roll into these 3 programs. Just to try to explain what I'm talking about here, here's an example of how it's rolled up. I'll start in the middle. ESL, not really any difference. ESL is ESL. Over to the left, though, I'll point out it's called ABE. A lot of people would kind of understandably, I'd say rightfully argue that, hey, it's not just one program, it's actually two, or really more appropriately, three separate programs. That is, it includes ABE, it includes high school diploma, and it includes high school equivalency. I'll just say, at least in TE land, we would definitely say that's three separate programs, not one. But in CAEP land, they really make an effort to roll that up into one single program called ABE, and it includes these three that you can see on the slide. Career Tech Ed over to the right has a very similar process, not quite as straightforward, I guess you might say, as ABE is, but nonetheless, it's rolled up. You can see we've got CTE and short-term CTE. We also have pre-apprenticeship. We also have workforce preparation. I'll just point out in TE land, those bottom two are completely separate programs. Just again, to step out a little bit more, because people are starting to wonder what the heck the difference is. Again, these are not official definitions, but just to try to let you get your foot on the rail on how you might distinguish them. Obviously, CTE and short-term CTE, one of them's obviously long-term and one of them short-term. They're both occupation specific. There's not really an official CAEP definition of where you separate short-term and long-term. Everybody always asks, the one number I've given is 48 hours. That's actually a college number. The only system I know that gives a number is the colleges. So that's the number I use, is 48 hours, but that's unofficial. But again, it includes short-term and long-term CTE. Pre-apprenticeship, like CTE, is also long-term and specific to an occupation. Obviously, the delivery model completely different. Workforce prep, on the other hand, is obviously workforce related, but it's short-term and it's not occupation specific. If you're doing things like resume writing, job interview skills, workplace safety, etc., that is, instruction that relates to the workforce, but not necessarily a specific occupation. That's what we would call workforce preparation. So just to kind of bring it all to fruition here, this is the way TE would define the structure. And again, some of the superstars are kind of wondering why there's a difference. So we're trying to point out what it is here. So in TE land, again, we've got ABE, ESL, and what is TE land? Okay, sorry, I'm getting a little too non-basic. Just hold on for a minute. But again, we've got the three at the top. We've got adults with disabilities and parents K-12 success. I'll just say added pre-apprenticeship and workforce prep to this diagram to show NTE, and LTE stands for TOPS Pro Enterprise. I made a really big deal about, hey, we have newbies after COVID, so you're keeping me honest. Yeah, there's a lot of you that haven't heard any of this crazy stuff before. Yeah, if I'm going on saying TE land, understood, you have no idea what the heck I'm talking about. So again, TE, TOPS Pro Enterprise. I'll just say L for my own edification. When Jody types out the acronym in the chat, does that help you? Or does that just make you say a follow-up question like, hey, what the heck is TOPS Pro Enterprise? Inquiring minds need to know. Okay, so when we say TOPS Pro Enterprise, you do know what that is. Okay, good. So TE is the acronym. In CASAS land, and hopefully that's more familiar to you than TE land, we use the acronym TE all the time. We probably assume everybody knows that acronym as well as we do. Obviously, no one does. Okay, thank you for catching me there. Okay, so I'll just say I'll stop there. For some of you that have been at it, that should be helpful. If you're new, in context with the, hey, what the heck do you mean by TE land? It might be semi-helpful, semi-not. Bear with me, though. I'm trying to kind of bring it back over the last few years. Sanity check, everybody hanging in there, because we've got a mixed audience in so many different ways. I ask that all the time anyway. I'm going to be a little bit more obnoxious about that than even I am normally, because we're the epitome of mixed group. So I'll just say thank you, a couple of you, for chiming in. I'm going to take it and run. So here's a few of these. I tried to consolidate a little bit, keep it from running amok, but here are some topical issues. Again, I'll say in CAEP land, these are some things that we've been talking about for a while. Some of you have heard this constantly, some of you not so much, but we'll start with goal setting. I would argue the first half of 2022, everything I talked about CAEP-wise related to goal setting, because that was the big evolution last year. Like I said, it feels kind of like it, went with the thud because I hear nothing about it anymore. But nonetheless, we all have goals. We all had to set goals at the agency and consortium level in June. I kind of do feel, like there were a lot of folks in their bunkers for a while with the budget out now and the LAO report now. It feels like everybody's come out of their bunkers. I do kind of feel like now that everybody's coming out of their bunkers, that we'll be hearing a lot more about those goals that we all dutifully set in NOVA last June. So that's one big issue. Adult serve, that's something we talked about for the first time in 2019. We brought it up as the 3 buckets. It really didn't make any sense to anybody then. Hopefully it makes a little bit more sense now. But by those 3 categories or 3 buckets, we're referring to hours of instruction. I'll just say I've talked about it a lot over the last year because CAEP has. That is, we're having a lot of new tracking related to how many students have 0 hours of instruction, how many students have 1 to 11 hours of instruction, versus how many students are participants. That is, how many have 12 or more hours of instruction. When I bring it up that way, does that make sense to you? Yes or no? And again, I'm going to continue to be obnoxious this way. Got to say that what on earth do you mean by TE was a good wake-up call for me. I want to make sure I'm not just talking in acronyms or whatever. Everybody know what I mean by the 3 buckets when we're looking at those different areas of hours of instruction. Again, the mandatory goals relate to that quite a bit. We'll have more on this throughout, but that's a big issue that we have been talking about the last few years. Another related issue is hours by program. This isn't the 3 buckets, but before COVID, we had a couple fire drills. I remember kind of that year leading into it. By fire drill, that is, there was a big state need to figure out the total number of hours your students were accruing. So in TOPS Enterprise, there's a report called Hours by Program that just spits out the total number of instructional hours at your agency by program. That is, how many total hours do all of your ABE students collectively have? How many in ESL? How many in HSE? Whatever. That is, you're sending your hours by program so we can see the total number of hours you're serving at your agency and your consortium. The big issue is, what if you've got multiple programs? That is, you have a class that has more than 1 program assigned. How are you going to figure that out? The default answer in TE is it will basically treat every single class 50-50. That is, TE assumes everything is evenly split. So just to give an obvious example, if you've got an IET class that maybe you're targeting for both CTE and ESL at the same time, TE is always assuming that it's 50-50, so it will credit half the hours to ESL and half the hours to CTE in my example. If you know good and well the right answer is really more 75% ESL and 25% CTE, that's fine, but then that means you need to create 2 classes, not just 1, and more carefully allocate those hours so all the ESL hours get credited to the ESL class and all the CTE hours get credited to the CTE class. That seems like so 2019 because it is 2019, but I bring that up because it was a really big deal kind of the last time we had these trainings. And I will point out, related to a lot of the things we've been discussing over the last 2 or 3 months or so, in my opinion, this is probably going to make a comeback. It wouldn't be surprising if we have a couple of these fire drills here in the next year or so. So just remember, that's hours by program. A similar issue is service hours. So the big issue, and hey, I'm waxing nostalgic, But the big issue of program year 2018-19 and CAEP land, sorry, yeah, I'm going to keep using those goofy cliches, is whether services count as hours of instruction. At that time, half the state said yes, half the state said no. For about a year, when we were doing trainings, we just shrug and say, oh, no, we do whatever you want. You know, we gave those kind of answers for about a year. I remember it well, Summer Institute 2019. Oh, by the way, in Garden Grove, California, where we'll be in 2023, Neil and I did a training and we brought this up. It was a little bit of acrimony, I remember, at that session, but we did our homework and we found out pretty clearly that the answer is no. Service hours don't count. Looking at federal regs, when they say instructional hours, it doesn't necessarily have to be in the classroom. COVID obviously taught us that our instruction need not be in the classroom. That's one thing we definitely know now, but it does need to relate to that instructional program. If you're doing counseling, that's wonderful, but it's not part of the instruction. So yes, you should track that you're doing that, and it's great that you are, but it's not technically part of one's hours of instruction. Another one coming down the pike, I think, that we've talked a ton about, WIOA 2. We really haven't talked about it as much in CAEP, I don't think, as collaboration with your workforce partners. That, of course, continues to be a top priority in WIOA land. But, you know, again, in CAEP, there's some reasons why I think it will start becoming a bigger deal. Carolyn yesterday mentioned that that governor 130 million, that is, you know, there's some funding for healthcare in IET for English language learners. There's a new funding coming out with that. It does really look like that's going to involve career tech ed. If it does, that definitely means it will probably be more of a CAEP collaboration issue, much more so than WIOA 2, because of course, CAEP includes career tech ed, and WIOA 2 generally doesn't. So I do think there'll be a lot more of that collaboration addressed by CAEP, not just WIOA 2, moving forward. Okay. All right, so I'm picking my spots here. I'm not following up on all of these issues, but here's a little bit on goal setting. I'll point out at the end of the presentation, I won't rattle them all off, but there is a slide that lists all of these if you want the official list. But just to summarize, these are how we're setting up goal setting for CAEP. So there's 2 mandatory metrics at the consortium level. There's one involving 4 barriers, and I think it's what, low income, English language learners, low literacy, and there's one I'm forgetting. I forget, maybe somebody can, you know, kick my head in and remember the 4th one, but there's 4 barriers. I know the number's 4. I'm remembering 3 out of the 4, but I'm drawing a blank. But there's one involving 4 different barriers. It's just a simple one to show that you're serving learners with those 4 barriers. And then by enrolled adults, that refers to those 3 buckets. At the consortium level, the requirement is to be able to show you're moving as many students as possible from that 0 hours bucket and moving them into the 1 to 11 hours bucket. That is, so you can at least call them enrolled adults or adults served. If they have 0, you can't really call them that. But once they have 1 or more hours, that is a little more tangible. So if you can get them to that 1 to 11, that is better. Then the mandatory member level metrics, there's a funding metric. I won't get into that. That number of participants is the other one related to the 3 buckets. That's the next step forward. So at the agency level, the mandatory metric is to show how many students you're moving from that 1 to 11 hours bucket to the participants bucket, which is the 12 or more hours. That is for CAEP outcomes, for pre and post testing, for WIOA 2 federal reporting. That bottom line requirement is for the 12 hours of instruction. That is, you need to have your student become a participant. That's the one that's required at the agency level. And for many reasons, you know, obviously the target for all students is to get that 12 hours of instruction so they qualify for outcomes and they get on all those reports. And when we show all the wonderful things we're doing to the legislature, that 12 or more hours is what gets them on the map so we can show all those great things. And then the optional level, my understanding is every agency needs to choose at least one. You know, again, there's a list later that you can look at if you want, but I tend to feel like all the things on the list are pretty much as expected: pre-post gain, high school diploma, high school equivalency, occupational licensure, you know, get a job. All the things that you're tracking are the things that are on the list for these goals. Okay, and then here's a little bit more on what I'm calling the 3 buckets. Again, we brought this up. This is a slide from 2019. Nobody really understood this then. I think everybody kind of does now. Number 1, we say service-only students. That's our term for 0 hours of instruction. Again, they're students that you're serving, but they're getting services, not instructional hours. Then bucket number 2, they've enrolled in a class, they've accrued hours, but they're still less than 12. And then those that have continued long enough to qualify for CAEP reporting and qualify for federal reporting, that is, they get the 12 or more hours. Here's the same concept from a TE point of view. This report is the CAEP enrollees by hours. I'm calling it new, but it's not really new anymore. I think we released this one in mid-2021. But again, you can see the 3 buckets here where we're looking at that CAEP summary. We're dividing each of those areas into the 3 buckets. You can see those 2 sets of 3 arrows, obviously red, blue, and green, for each of those 3 buckets. And this is the report you can use to show and evaluate how many of those students have 12 or more hours, how many have 1 to 11, how many have 0. This should be the quote unquote easy way to measure your progress on that mandatory consortium and agency level metric. Okay, I'm in a little bit of a transition here. Let me just stop. Again, I'm going to be obnoxious this way. Sanity check for everybody. Is this making sense? Is this getting eerily like 15 or 20 minutes you'll never get back? All those usual cliches. Where are we here with that? Sorry, inquiring minds have to know. Okay, thank you. L, you've been very responsive. L, thank you. Anybody else but L still hanging in there? I know L's hanging in there. Not sure about the other 59. Okay, there's somebody's chiming. Better from the last meeting. And I'll just say, I don't know who brought that up. I won't go back and find you or out you or whatever. But yes, CAEP accountability, suspiciously similar to WIOA 2 accountability that way. That is, anybody tells me they got it all down after one sitting, there's a 125% chance I don't believe you. Just about everybody takes 4 or 5 sittings of this craziness before it really starts to germinate. I'd say your average person, forget about average person. Your superstar person needs 4 or 5 sittings before any of this has a chance of germinating. It's the ultimate drinking from the fire hose. So yeah, little by little, hopefully it gets a little bit better. All right, thank you for humoring me on that. 5 or more, so I'm underestimating it. You need way more than 5. All right, I'll take your word for it, Elena. Thank you. Anyway, this is a slide we were talking about a lot at the very start when we were still AB 86. So I'll start by getting everybody's foot on that rail by saying around that time, it was 2013 or 14. Jody probably knows this better than I do. I think it was 2013, but Jody, I bet you can confirm or deny. Jody will indicate and grade me on whether I'm right or wrong. Anyway, the legislature passed AB 104. They specifically identified the fact that we have this funding for adult ed and took it a step further. This is what these are the specific outcomes that adult ed is going to be achieving. You might say, hey, this is why we're giving you the money, because we're expecting you to show that your students are achieving outcomes in these areas. I'll just say over there to the right, there's those 6 areas that everybody knows and love. And again, they're the areas that we know and love because the California legislature says so. So what I also like to bring up here, and this was also part of the state legislation, is it also required us to align all of these outcomes and all of this reporting to the WIOA federal, okay, thank you, Jody. Yeah, that's great. You know, I knew you'd know all that. Anyway, we basically required us to align to WIOA, which, as most of you know, is the current federal reporting system. They were real clear. Hey, we've got this framework. The feds in their infinite wisdom have lined out this very detailed system. No, we're not going to reinvent the wheel. We're just going to align to all that legwork the feds have already done. That's what this slide tries to show. So what I like to say is when you look at the federal WIOA system, we have what the feds like to call performance indicators and what the feds call measurable skill gains. That's what we mean by MSGs, by the way, measurable skills gains. Anyway, the feds have those two types of outcomes. Performance indicators are what I like to call kind of the tangible outcomes, or I also like to call them, you know, the outcomes you can kind of hang your hat on, real easy to identify and measure. Things like get a job, get your occupational license, complete your high school diploma, enter college, you know, all of those things that are easy to measure, hang your hat on, you know, type of outcomes. I like to say there's good news and bad news about performance indicators. The good news, I'd say, is pretty much everybody agrees these performance indicators are wonderful outcomes. Nobody really tries to argue that getting a job isn't a good outcome. Everybody agrees enter college is great. Getting your GED is also good. Getting a wage increase is good. Everything on the performance indicators list is no less than 125% positive. However, the bad news about performance indicators is if we rely solely on performance indicators, we're highly likely to show that the overwhelming majority of our students are doing a lousy job, which of course we know nothing could be further from the truth. But again, if we rely on performance indicators, that is kind of what it looks like. It takes a while to get a job. It takes a while to finish up the diploma or GED, or to be ready to enter college, or be ready for workforce training, or completing your certificate or whatever. All of those things take time. So we're going to leave a lot of students out in the cold if all we do is measure ourselves by performance indicators. So that's where the bottom measurable skill gains comes into play. You're listening to the CASAS peeps here. So of course, we're going to say by far, and I mean overwhelmingly, the most obvious example here is pre and post testing, right? That is, hey, they're not ready to get a job. They're not, you know, they're not ready to finish up their GED quite yet. But hey, they did a bang up job on their CASAS math or CASAS reading. So we can at least show that literacy gain, that level gain, to verify the fact that our students are still doing a terrific job. So going back over here, we're aligning these indicators and measurable skill gains in K-Plan. You know, some of it, you know, when we were looking at this was easy. Obviously, the CASAS guy is going to say, hey, ABE, ESL, mission accomplished. We have CASAS testing. We already have an outstanding system in place to measure ABE, ASE, and ESL without requiring that final prize outcome. So we can just implement that for those students and do the same wonderful things where we've already been doing in federal reporting. But for some of the other programs, workforce prep and CTE, you know, obviously it's not quite so easy. We don't have any built-in way to show progress without relying on that final prize. So the word I've used over the years is retrofitting. We have lots of federal outcomes for WIOA reporting. Some relate to us as Title II adult ed agencies. Others relate to workforce agencies. So what we've done is we've retrofitted some of those outcomes and basically identified them as priority areas for these 6 areas of AB 104. Okay, I better get moving here. We're not doing badly, but I do need to move along. So anyway, we talked about 4 areas of AB 104. Not so coincidentally, here are 6 areas of AB 104. Not so coincidentally, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 color-coded boxes resembling those 6 areas. So these are the 6 areas. And this slide just lists all of the very specific outcomes a student can achieve in which of those 6 areas of AB 104 those different outcomes fall under. Chances are lots of you have encountered these over time. So this is our current system. Most of you would say it's a little bit overwhelming. More on that here in a minute, but just for now, these are the 6 areas that we're required to report. These are the different outcomes that fall under the different categories. Here's the infamous bubble boy slide. This is just the same information as the previous slide, but in much gorier, much more annoying detail. We called it the bubble boy slide. Well, because, hey, it's our bubble form. This is a screenshot of our CASAS update record. Nobody uses these bubble forms anymore, but we still like them for training. They're a really, really good way to, present things from a training point of view. Here's one of them. So again, 6 areas of AB 104, same non-coincidence here, 6 different color-coded bubbles at the bottom. That is, we've color-coded these bubbles to show exactly which outcomes relate to CAEP. So just to give you an easy example, looking at the upper left, we've got that blue bubble, got a job. Surprise, surprise, that's blue. All of the ones we've marked in blue relate to employment. Nobody's really going to be that surprised that got a job is one of the 3 employment-related outcomes for CAEP. You can use the same logic for all these others. Again, 6 different areas, 6 different color codings. So when you're looking at what you need to report in enterprise, what you need to work on with your students, here's a cheat sheet to make sure you're reporting the right things. One more of these, same exact information, but this is from the perspective of TE software, letter codes instead of color codes, but the same 6 areas of AB 104, the exact same outcomes, but this is just showing where you can find them inside the TE software. If it makes more sense to be able to figure out check boxes rather than bubbles, here's a way to get that same information in a slightly different way. Okay, so I'll stop for a minute. Okay, I hear what you're saying about the update record. Totally would be nice. Okay, yeah, we've heard that. I don't think there's a final answer. I got to say TMI. We probably will look at that, but back to the, hey, we're looking at how we might need to streamline this. Hey, things like LAO report. There's a lot of things we know we might need to tweak about this, or perhaps even totally redo. So we'll probably look at that first before getting all the infrastructure in place, I got to say. But yes, I'll just say to Shell, you're in a very big club of people that make that suggestion at the very least. Okay, so I'm not going to go over all the outcomes. This is going to sound nuts. I'm taking probably the hardest to understand outcome and bringing that up first. So some people don't like that, but I'll just to explain myself is I'm sort of picking and choosing here. I'm just picking a few of these outcomes and I'm purposefully selecting ones that typically garner the most questions. There are some outcomes like pre and post testing and get a job. Hey, we don't need to explain that one because everybody kind of understands how those work, but a lot of these other ones, maybe not so much. So 2 good examples, the ones I'd say Neil and I have explained more than any others are these 2 literacy gains called occupational skills gain and workforce prep outcome. So for starters, the title is part of the problem. We've looked at it and we know the title is part of the problem, but we're kind of leaving as it is. But that is, we're calling them literacy gains, but yet they really refer more to CTE and workforce prep. That gets us started on the wrong foot. And hey, lots of other things that confuse people about these too. But anyway, we've got these 2 literacy gains going back to that federal slide I showed there a couple minutes ago, just so you can make sense of this, is this is what I mean by retrofitting. Hey, for ABE students, for ESL students, we can get gains in bite-sized morsels by doing pre and post testing. Most people would say for CTE, that's not really appropriate. We need to evaluate their vocational skills, not necessarily their literacy skills. So that's the retrofitting we're talking about. So when we looked at this, we came up with a couple ways of doing it called occupational skills gain and workforce prep outcome. Obviously, lots of confusion between the two. So what we've said over the years is occupational skills gain is what you mark when a student accomplishes a portion of something longer term, whereas workforce prep milestone represents full completion of something shorter term. The occupational skills gain example, we're just making it up. We'll say we've got a student in welding. We're saying, hey, it's 5 semesters or 5 modules long. The student basically does a great job in module 1. They pass some sort of exam at the end. Maybe that's CASAS testing. Maybe it's a written test you made up. Maybe it's just a functional skills check you made up. It can be any of that, but they pass some kind of exam that suggests they did a great job in module 1 and now they're moving on to module 2. That's an example of occupational skills gain. Workforce prep outcome, the example is, hey, we've got a 15-hour course on job search strategies. It's kind of open and shut case. It's a real short course, just focusing on that one skill. Hey, the student sticks around for all 15 hours. Hey, they're still alive at the end of it. Congratulations. That's an opportunity where you could mark workforce prep outcome to show that they completed that shorter term program as a stepping stone, usually to bigger and brighter things. But that's our example of workforce prep milestone. Okay, I don't see anything else. I thought I saw a couple new chats, but no, I don't. So I'll just say, any questions about that? Sorry, I'm doing multitasking a little too much here, maybe. Does everybody understand that distinction? I know I'm just sort of throwing PhD level issues, you know, when, hey, we're trying to complete our stinking GD for crying out loud. So I admit guilty as charged. That said, do people feel like they got this? Again, I'm picking on what people ask. Okay, well, at least somebody's thumbs upping me. I'll take the money and run. Okay, thank you. All right, so here's another, again, higher level question, but this is what everybody always asks. So this is what we're addressing here. So, hey, we've got that workforce prep milestone and occupational skills gain. We also have the question of, hey, we understand that, but when is it higher level? When can we mark that as a post-secondary outcome and not just quote unquote literacy gain? Well, you can see over here to the left, we've got those 2 CTE literacy gains at the bottom. We've got those CTE related outcomes at the post-secondary level up top. That's just the list for you. So what we say is, hey, we get a literacy gain for either completing something shorter term or partially completing something longer term. That outcome rises to the level of post-secondary when the student achieves full completion of something longer term. So sticking with my example, once that same student completes module 5 of 5 in that welding program, then you can give them a post-secondary outcome, which sometimes is a credential, sometimes licensure, depends on the specific occupational. But that is, it's a higher level post-secondary outcome. Okay, one more thing on post-secondary. This hasn't been a long-standing issue, but it's kind of been one more recently. That is, in the post-secondary area, gee, why do we have so many stinking check boxes and bubbles for post-secondary? This is one area where the list is understandably way too overwhelming. We will look at maybe paring it down because that's kind of a new thing that's come up that I gotta say is really sunk in, at least in this nugget a lot. Something we really need to think about, make it a little easier. Gotta say, I think we were really worried 5 years ago about, I kind of remember, you know, pulling that bandwagon into town. Back in 2016, it was an empty bandwagon. Ain't nobody touching that bandwagon with a 10-foot pole. So I kind of remember we would talk about, hey, we really need to set it up so we can be there and say, hey, bring us, you're tired, you're hungry, you're weak. This bandwagon accepts everybody. So, hey, it doesn't matter whether you're marking occupational license or occupational certificate. Either way, we want you on our bandwagon. That was kind of what we did in our forming years of 2016, 17, forming, storming, norming, performing. Got to say, we're past the forming stages now. We've had all kinds of storming. Now we kind of need to look more at norming and performing. That might mean fewer bubbles. But anyway, we've got a lot of bubbles because post-secondary, back to the wonky federal reporting explanation, is post-secondary is the term the feds use to represent everything that's directly above the high school level. Fittingly enough, secondary is the term they use for that. So surprise, surprise, they use the term post-secondary to talk about what comes after that. So for some students, as you know, that means college. For other students, that means CTE. So up at the top, there are our CTE-related occupational outcomes for post-secondary. That bottom list are the list of college-related outcomes to post-secondary. And federal reporting land, that's all at the same level because it's the level that occurs after high school. Okay, and then one more area I wanted to touch on here is transition. So here's another one we used in the early years, where these are the 3 different types of transition for CAEP: transition to ASE, CTE, or college. I'll just say those are the 3 transitions a student can make and get a successful CAEP outcome. Over to the right, and this is where some of that retrofitting came in years ago, we would show what you can mark to show those different transitions. For ASE, it's all under the hood because we've got our ABE, ESL, and ASE students all in TE anyway. For CTE, here are the 3 different check boxes you can mark to show CTE transition. Down below, there are the 2 different boxes you could mark to show transition to college. This has always been confusing, so we've shown this graphic, which I think has made it a little easier for most people to understand than the bullets did. But again, the way a student achieves transition is they're starting at one of these blue boxes to the left. That is, they're starting in either K-12 adult ed or non-credit community college, ABE, ASC, or ESL. Transition to CTE is in that upper right, one of those 2 red boxes. That is, they're transitioning to either adult ed CTE or to community college CTE. The transition to college is in that lower right. That is, they end up in 4 credit community college. I'll say this has raised some questions here lately. It does seem counterintuitive in a way for all these areas where CAEP kind of goes out of its way to be a big jumbled mess without any clarity whatsoever. The one area where there's uber clarity, you might say, for CAEP is this transition where in order for it to count, the student needs to end up in 4 credit college. If they end up in non-credit community college, no, that's not a transition. Got to say that's a rare area of extreme agreement between colleges and K-12. On both sides, everybody agrees if you go from K-12 adult ed to non-credit, that's more like a lateral transition. For it to be a move up, so to speak, it needs to be to 4 credit. That's the way we track. So I'll just say that was another big mouthful. We taught literacy gains. We taught post-secondary transition. Another sanity check. What areas are confusing here? What questions come up here with these outcomes? Again, and if you have questions about some I didn't talk about, I'm happy to address them. I'm just trying to point out the ones that always create the most problems. Anything here at all? Just a bunch of crickets chirping? Is that because, good grief, this is nuts? Or is that, hey, everything's so clear? Why on earth would I have a question when things are so crystal clear? Okay, both. It's a little, okay, I'll take that. A little bit Somehow it's all of that at the same time. All right, I'll take your word for it. Okay, one last thing on outcomes. How many of you, and hey, I know some of you have because you've been at recent webinars or in-person trainings, but how many of you have heard of I3? Does that ring a bell? Or is it immediately kind of like when I was talking about TE land? What on earth is I3? Okay, all right, there you go. There's an honest engine. Great, thank you. All right, there we go. Just a question mark. Okay, that's good to know. All right, well taken. Beautiful. Okay, so first off, you can see from the slide, I won't ask you what I3 stands for. Hopefully that part is intuitive. It stands for Immigrant Integration Indicators. So this is another one of those kind of before CAEP, it was a big stinking deal, or before COVID, it was a big stinking deal. Then COVID happened and it kind of did sort of get forgotten in the mix, whatever. I'll just say, I'll start at the top. This is AB 2098. That's more California state legislation. This one came out in 2018. This one did not require I3, but it did require the state to make sure that, you know, CAEP and adult education had some way to address progress and metrics related to immigrant integration. So around that time, late 2018, early 2019, there was a field committee. They talked about immigrant integration. They talked about lots of things, not just I3, but I3 was one of the outcomes, and I3 was kind of the part that represented what I would call the CASAS argument in all this. That is, we at CASAS did have our own argument here, which is something like, hey, we've been doing immigrant integration for 25 years. This isn't new at all, only we never called it immigrant integration. We called it EL civics. So long story short is the committee agreed with this mostly and said, yeah, we can now use those COAPs or additional assessments that we've been using in EL civics for years and now credit those as immigrant integration indicators for CAEP reporting. So if you've seen that I3 column on the TE CAEP summary and wondered where that big number came from, it's probably because you're a WIOA 2 agency. You're doing a great job in EL civics. If you are, highly likely you inherited some I3 outcomes. That's what it's looking at, is it's just tracking students that pass COAPs. When they pass COAPs, that is an immigrant integration indicator. We have done a lot of work with the folks that, you know, like allies that brought up this as an issue. It's not 100% overlap, but it is a good 85 to 90% overlap. The same things the immigrant advocates are suggesting we need to track are almost identical to the things we've been tracking in EL civics COAPs all these years. So now that is an official CAEP outcome. A couple quick things, what's in it for you is a lot of you over the years have lamented that, hey, these COAPs are great, EL civics is great, but why is it limited to ESL? Well, here's your chance for CAEP land. CAEP has gone out of its way to say all students are immigrants, not just ESL. So CAEP is going out of its way to say this is available to all programs. It's not, you know, ESL only like EL civics and WIOA 2 is. I admit when people want that, they usually want payment points. I gotta say payment points don't factor into this at all. But hey, if you really are concerned about ABE or ASC or CTE students being involved, here's a great chance to do that. The final thing I'll bring up is the reports. We do have some I3 reports in TOPS Enterprise. I'll just say, hey, in my opinion, the I3 reports we have in TE are a lot better than anything we have for EL civics. EL civics reports really just do your bean counting for you. They don't do anything else. The I3 reports do the bean counting, and they also relate at the agency, class, and student level, you know, performance to the specific content of the COAP. That is, it does some assessment to instruction sort of work the same way that CASAS content standard reports and competency reports do. it's much better reporting from an I3 point of view. So we'll have more on this over time. I think we released the I3 metric and the I3 reports in June of 2020. Go figure, a lot of people have bigger fish to fry in June of 2020 than learning about I3. Gotta say, the club that missed the I3 memo is about 25 to 50 times larger than the club that actually saw that memo in June 2020. So there is a little bit of start over with I3 in a lot of ways, gotta say as well. Okay, so here's a crazy transition slide. This is the same one I've been using in all of the in-person trainings. Here's one that I kind of did special for this training. A few of you did bring up some special questions. I'll start with this one and then kind of work backwards. I'll leave it on this slide and hope that maybe a few of you might be willing to read it and digest it. That said, I did want to stop here for a minute and just talk about what specific outcomes might be working well, what's more likely, what specific outcomes might be causing a big stinking headache, what outcomes might seem irrelevant, again, because we're looking at far north. There's also kind of a feeling of, hey, are there any that really seem difficult or perhaps even irrelevant if you're a smaller rural agency, in far Northern California, anything that really strikes you funny or perhaps annoying. Anybody with any kind of input on that? Any questions, anything where you've had a lot of confusion where, hey, we really want to do this, but the guidance is terrible. We don't know which way is up because you're not giving us very good guidance here. Anything like that that's kind of comes up all the time. If you're like most, there's bound to be something like this that does. I'm not seeing much. Anybody want to raise their hand? Nobody really wants to jump in on this one, I guess. I'm looking at the chat. I'm not seeing a lot of chat worthiness here. I'll wait another moment longer. Is everybody just kind of waiting for me to jump into this list and hope that, okay, there we go. Thank you, Laura Lee. All right, thank you. Brave Laura Lee comes up with a comment. Thank you. All right, and I'll point out that is one that's on this list. Okay, well, let's just move to the list. Hey, I've gotten somebody to be brave. I'll declare victory and move on. So I'll just say the top two, I am kind of hoping that somebody maybe brings up a Northern California specific issue. I'll just, in terms of overview, when we look at the region, when we hear from the agencies collectively, I will say for sure that's something I've heard a few times before. Hey, we're smaller, we're more rural. Because of that, we always seem to get the memo later than everybody else. And with that, a lot of things that make a heck of a lot of sense. If you're in LA or San Diego or Sacramento or whatever, hey, it works great for those urban type of programs. But hey, we're more remote. It really doesn't make nearly as much sense to us. They sure sound like something that was designed by a Sacramento person or a San Diego person that really doesn't know which way is up here in these rural areas. Anything like that. Okay, well, I'll try to plant the seeds that way in here for parent ed. So Laura Lee, I'll just say, I'm not sure, were you the one that brought up this question already to Jody or to me about that? I'll just say that third bullet is what you're mentioning. I'll just clarify though, when you say parent ed, you really mean parents supporting K-12 success, right?
Yeah, Jay, that's exactly what I'm referring to. Here at Sutter County, we report a lot of outcomes, but that is one area in which we struggle with because for lack of maybe not understanding what can be included in that or just not being able to provide that service, but any support in that particular area.
No, it's a good one. It's a one that I don't hear a lot about, but it's kind of like that horse along the outside bend. Hey, wait a minute. They're in last place, but they're coming around the bend down the stretch. They might make a move and win the race, but that's where it's been. I'll say, Janae, are you still here? Sorry, I'm gonna out you. And hey, beyond that, I'll just say, are you with Karen? Because hey, you were sitting together at that training a couple weeks ago. I'll just point out, I know you guys were ones that brought up the same question that Laura Lee is bringing up. So I just want to out you as kind of a way to maybe get empathy for Laura Lee or whatever, and that you brought it up. So for starters, there's no official outcomes for parents supporting K-12 success. There are some insiders that do look at this and admit that, yeah, that's kind of a wart of CAEP, that we knew that that was a big problem back in 2016-17. We really didn't have the wherewithal or bandwidth to get all that done then. We kind of thought we'd pick it up eventually, and we never did. So I'm admitting right now that, yeah, that is an Achilles heel. We have it as an official program. It really is a wart that we've got 0 outcomes. But I'll say, somebody brought up EL Civics. That's an informal way you could do it. That's a great answer, Cindy. I'll give the same answer that I gave to the Silicon Valley group a couple weeks ago, is there are some update outcomes on that update field 9, that bubble boy slide again. I guess, hey, I've got it on my screen. I can just show it to you. It's just a few slides back. So looking at these, okay, I'm sorry, it's truncated. So I guess, hey, I'm shooting myself in the foot because I cut it off here, but it's that form. But you'll just have to take my word for it. On that form, there's a different, we're looking at employment, or we're looking at employment category here, but there's a separate category called family and community. So some of you that go way back know that we used to have family literacy outcomes we reported. That's been a long time since that's really been on the radar, but there are some family literacy outcomes that are still there on the update form, getting obnoxiously wonky. There's actually an NRS table 8 and an NRS table 9. I'll just say, Laura Lee, I know you know TE, so you probably don't have data there. I'll just say the tables themselves, I would say, are god awful, because they really ruin it by bringing in that 2/4 and 4/4 after exit. For that reason, I don't think using the tables as is a good idea at all. However, it does have 5 or 6 of those family literacy related outcomes. As far as which specific outcomes they select, I think their choices that the NRS makes are very appropriate. Gotta say, that table 8 and table 9, take a look. I kind of feel like those are the best things on the table moving forward. I'll say again, there's nothing official. There's nothing. I don't have a new colored bubble for that bubble boy slide where I'm ready to make it official or anything like that. So officially, there's a lot more state level discussion to be had. But if you're just looking for something instead of nothing, you're looking for a way to informally see how well those students are doing, I would recommend those outcomes on update field 9. And again, focus on those ones related to family and community. And then if you really want to be a wonk, you can look at NRS table 8 and 9, and you can see the specific ones on those federal tables. I really do think the feds are on the right track with, the specific ones they list. I am promising nothing. I say again, I'm promising nothing here, but I'll just say, if I had my cake and ate it too, that would be maybe the direction I'd go, because there are NRS tables involved. I do feel like if we stick to that list, we can definitely say we're aligning to WIOA, because there's a stake at NRS table that addresses it. You can't get any better aligned than that. Okay, sorry, I'm looking at the chat now. Yeah, so EL Civics, good, thank you. Yeah, EL Civics relates to WIOA too. And I gotta say, Cindy, Carol, I kind of feel like you're here to be the, echo chamber for me in a lot of ways. So thanks for that. Maybe you disagree there, but I'll just say that's how it seems to me. Because yeah, the whole CAEP and WIOA 2 is becoming a lot more closely together. Obviously, you're hearing from the CASAS guy, so he's going to say that's a great thing. But little by little, it seems like it's getting closer. So yes, looking at EL Civics is another real good way to do that. I know there are some helping your kids with their education CAEPs. We probably need to do a better job pointing those out for the program. And again, you could informally do those update outcomes. So I'll just say there's a big mouthful, Laura Lee. Was there anything there worthwhile? Just checking. Anything to follow up with, perhaps? It was such a big mouthful, it drove you away, huh?
No, thanks, Jay. You directed me to where.
Oh, you're too busy generating federal table 8 to hear my question, right? All right, so enough there, but that's a good one. The other one like that I'll bring up, it relates to adults with disabilities. I would say that's in better shape than Parents K-12 Success, but it's similarly another one that's been ignored. You know, nobody's asking about that, but I'll point out we do have the power assessment and the 2A to 5A. That's my something is better than nothing for that program. But I'll point out that one, like in everything else, it gets kind of the short end of the stick. That one also is one that I know we need to do better. So just to make sure we cover the ones that were brought up to me, Spanish, GD, or high set, what's the best way to show performance? So, I mean, I think I tried to pare it down because it was a much longer question, but I'll just mention it alluded. Gee, I'm not sure if pre-post testing will work. I will double back and say for WIOA too, pre and post testing necessarily needs to work because you're required to pre and post test. Gotta say, we've looked at this. If we bring up to the feds, hey, can we get out of pre and post testing because it's not appropriate for Spanish? We already know the overwhelmingly more likely federal response is going to be something like, what the bleep are you doing counting those ones in Spanish? You shouldn't really be doing that. You should be aligning it to this federal system better. If you're allowing Spanish, you're probably not doing it right. We already know that's what their answer is going to be. So we go way out of our way to not ask them that question. So just realize that, yes, the tail is wagging the dog and not the other way around. Exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. So technically, you should be doing pre and post testing, despite the fact that it doesn't always seem logical. That's point one. Two, more to your point, I'd say the most popular answer here is to do math. Your average student in your average agency definitely would say the math isn't perfect, but it definitely is a lot better than reading. And I think your average student, average agency would say, yeah, if you just hedge a little bit and do it in math, it's not perfect, but it works well. Most people would say it works well long before they would say it works poorly. That's the most popular answer. I'll just say another workaround, which is not what you're asking here, but a lot of times those Spanish GD students are going to also be an ESL. If you just do the ESL approved tests on the ESL side, then you don't need to worry about the HSE testing side because you've already met that minimum requirement to pre-post on the ESL side. So you don't have to worry about that student. But those are the two best examples, you know, for that. Those are the two best examples for that one. You know, those are probably the best suggestions I could give you there. Hopefully that's helpful somehow. I'll just wait. I don't think that was your question, Laura Lee. I think that was somebody else. Anybody willing to claim that high school equivalency in Spanish question? Maybe not here. All right. Well, I know it wasn't one I made. It's a very common question, but it was one I received. Anyway, the bottom one is also one I received. Obviously, lots of LAO talk. So just because, hey, we got what the heck do you mean by TE? So I will say, hey, when we talk about the LAO and legislature talking, does everybody know what this bottom bullet refers to? Yes or no? A few of you I know can preach to it, but I don't know if it makes sense to everybody here. Okay, great. Patricia's given the question mark. So anybody want to fill in? LAO, what's that acronym mean? What does LAO stand for? Anybody want to be an apple polisher here and fill in the acronym? No, nobody's going to do that. So LAO stands for legislative. Oh, there we go. There we go. There we go. All right, Mandalise got it. Thank you. So, right. So the LAO, or Legislative Analyst Office, just released a report a month ago that was all about CAEP funding, brought up some new funding models. I'm not going to talk about it at length, but it did bring up some new funding models related to attendance and enrollment. It also had a clause in there where like 30% of the funding would be based on performance. That is based on a lot of the stuff we're talking about right now. And so, hey, is it going to be related to this? I'll just say, from what I know, it's recommending what we do in WIOA 2. I don't think it's going to be what ultimately ends up on our plate, but the recommendation on that report as a starting point suggested that we have CAEP follow the same guidelines as what California WIOA 2 does, which would be EFL gains. Harold, good catch. EFL stands for educational functioning level. That's another thing we don't have time to go over in detail, but the feds in their infinite wisdom have 12 levels, 6 for ABE, 6 for ESL. We at CASAS aligned to that federal system. When we talk about EFL gains, we're basically talking about those positive outcomes the students make through pre and post testing. So in WIOA 2, that's obviously the most common way agencies report outcomes and earn those payment points you've heard about. That's what gets payment points. I'll point out, though, it's not just EFL gains. It's also high school diploma. It's also GED and high set. It's also a bunch of different things related to EL civics. And lately, and this is what this person brings up, is just in the last year or so, they've added, outcomes from that employment and earnings survey. That's new. That hasn't been true historically, but in the last year or two, those students that report getting jobs through that follow-up survey, that's also now included in that WIOA 2 payment point system. So LAO acknowledges there's a ton of outcomes, kind of in the keep it simple category. It's suggesting, let's just use what we do for WIOA 2. That makes the most sense. That gets our foot on the rail moving forward. So it's not just EFL gains, but I will say it probably does cherry pick just the specific ones now that we're using in WIOA 2. Okay. All right. I know I'm talking way too long here, so I better pick up some steam here. So good questions, though. Hopefully this is still working. So services, I don't want to, get away without pointing out we're also collecting services. Out of curiosity, how many of you are doing services? Some people have that as a big part of your program. Others really don't do it. But again, services is also part of our CAEP reporting system. We've got 3 different categories shown here on the slide. Here's the screenshot in Enterprise that shows these 3 categories and all of the different specific services that are included in each of those categories. Just to give you an idea, supportive services is one category. These are the one, like legal and fiscal counseling, childcare, transportation, stuff like that. That is services that help students with their own personal issues to make them whole so they're better able to excel in, their CAEP instruction. Again, looking at the students' personal matters, not necessarily their instructional matters, so to speak. Then we have training services that relate a little bit more to, training, relate more to instruction in their program. Generally speaking, it's there to, provide a little extra help to allow students to qualify for a job or qualify for employment training, give them that little extra help. Sometimes that's things like extra ABE or ESL instruction. Sometimes it's, hey, they need their CPR card, so we offer them that. All kinds of little ways to get them across the finish line, through giving them little trainings. And then transition services, I'd argue, very much the same type of services as training services, but a little narrower in focus. That is, it's services that specifically work on helping the student either transition to employment or transition to college. A lot of the same stuff we talk about, you know, a lot of the stuff we talk about, you know, together, but again, that narrower focus. So on these next slides, and here's where I don't really have enough time to go over all of it, is I will point out these services have really gained a lot of discussion here in these recent discussions back to the, hey, now that we're out of COVID, we're having a lot of problems or whatever. It's been difficult, etc. You know, services is a big issue. I'll say more specifically with services, and this is true with all things CAEP reporting, but I'd say it's especially true with services. I can't believe I haven't brought this up yet, but a lot of people have brought up those old CAEP data police jokes that Neil and I would bring up in those old trainings. I'll just say, hey, when people would attend trainings in the good old days, people would ask questions like, hey, our counselor is doing X and Y and Z, all these wonderful things with the student. Is it okay if we use this checkbox or bubble to record this service? And our answer would, well, we wouldn't answer it first, would usually start with a laugh. Yeah, like the CAEP data police are gonna get you for that. Neil would point out that he was the one person CAEP data police. So there was a 0% chance you really had to worry about the data police, worrying about which bubble or checkbox you marked. Hey, if you're deliberate, if you're providing something positive, yeah, that's good. Just mark it as well as you can. Put everything positive in your data. It doesn't matter really how you do it. But people are saying, gee, it does matter how you do it. I'll stop soliloquy and just say there's a groundswell here for outcomes and services to be more consistent, to be more our way or the highway. We're not doing that yet, but we are looking at, you know, figuring out a way to be more prescriptive about this, with the bottom line being, when I'm looking at my report and when I'm looking at my report in Reading, I want it to mean the same thing as it means in Sacramento, same thing as it means in Bakersfield, the same thing as it means in San Diego, so we can compare. If we're just having all these stupid CAEP data police jokes and Bakersfield is doing it this way and Sacramento is doing it that way, then the data is meaningless. We need to be able to look at these reports and know that we're doing better or worse than some of these other agencies. So we're trying to get more prescriptive. Here's a start with services. So here's a few hand-picked supportive services. We're trying to pinpoint common adult ed-centric activities. So if you're doing Pell Grant, for example, select federal education cash assistance. If you're doing CalWORKS, that's the same thing as needs-based payments, you know, just for some examples here. Training services, if you get those WIOA 1 referrals, that's ABE ESL in conjunction with training, where your Title I is sending that client to bone up on their basic math skills or basic reading skills so they can qualify. That's another service. Skill upgrading is what we're saying is a good start for stuff like first aid and CPR and so on. Here's some transition services. So like, hey, if you visit an employer, that's good for work experience. A lot of you have talked over the years about taking field trips to the college. That's a good one for post-secondary academic education. So again, this is just a start. Way more things left off than included, but we tried to give you some examples of areas where we can be more prescriptive with this. We covered the areas that we kind of think are the most common areas that receive questions. So here's just a resource. If you're doing services, I'll add, if you've got specific ways you're doing it, we're all ears. We definitely need more help in you know, how people might be doing it and making sure that we have a good system. Okay, I need to move on here. So I'm going to get into the basics. I might run a little over because I do at least want to go over the entry update stuff. So some of you that are asking questions like, what the heck do you mean by TE? Yes, you're cursing me under my breath because I'm coming at this so late, but I got to say just a lot of stuff to talk about. Maybe we'll need to do this again. I'll talk with Jody and we'll figure out what our next steps are, but I know we have them. I'm just not sure yet what those are. So anyway, we have the CASAS entry and update record. Again, very few people bubbling and scanning anymore, but a great way to demonstrate it for training. So I think you all understand you're required to collect data at enrollment. We've always represented that by the CASAS entry record. That is, it's recording enrollment in a CAEP or WIOA program. When you're doing that, please do collect demographics, gender, race and ethnicity, date of birth, all required. Please do collect education level, labor force status, barriers to employment. More recently, when WIOA started 5 or 6 years ago, that brought up barriers. Also, be sure if you've got somebody with your workforce partners, mark that they're in Title I, Title III, or Title IV. That's in the personal status field. That's an area where we know we're not really doing that well. Hard to know, but if you know that, please do record it. This is what's new this year. I think everybody knows this. If you haven't heard, though, primary and secondary goals are required. They've been not required for 10 years. This is what the more common reaction is, not realizing it ever wasn't required than knowing now it is. But bottom line, it was required till 2012. It was a federal requirement up till that time. The feds made some big changes in 2012. The result was goals were no longer required. Short answer is, way back, we used to use goals to determine follow-up. That is, the students that had a goal of get a job were the ones we needed to follow up for get a job. If they had a goal of enter college, those are the ones that we needed to follow up for college, and so on. The feds got rid of that entirely back in 2012. They did not bring it back at all. The goal setting requirement here is at the state level, with the idea of, hey, at the state level, we've had a lot of things with goals, goal setting, SIP, all kinds of stuff like that. So it makes a lot of sense to have it required at that student level.
Jay, I'm going to interrupt because Harold had a great question. Will SSN be a requirement for data collection in the near future?
I don't think so, no. Back to those goals, I think I brought them up at least at the beginning. For federal reporting, we've got those goals. We are encouraging people to use SSN or collect it if you can, but we know there's no way it's going to be required for a lot of privacy related reasons. We want you to include social security number, but bottom line is, if the student kicks and screams and jumps up and down and whatever, bottom line, if they don't wanna, they ain't gotta. It's very clear that if they don't wanna, they ain't gotta, and I don't see that changing at all.
The nice thing about TE is, if your students are doing testing on TE, they can input it directly into TE during that entry place in their process. So that can eliminate some of that concern.
Yes, thank you. And I'll go a few minutes longer. If you leave, I'm not offended, but hey, I want to just finish up these basics here. So looking at update, you've got to collect at update. Above the line is what we said every year since 1999. Below that, a few years newer. But anyway, for entries, we've always said do that day one, square one of enrollment, do it right away. Updates, we've always been looser. You can do it monthly, quarterly, semester, trimester, kind of your choice, as long as you've got a good system in place. That's been our policy for 25 years. More recently, in the last 4 or 5 years, we now have the one exception for attendance hours. Anybody want to give me the one word or the one acronym answer for why we have all these crazy caveats related to attendance? Anybody know why that is? I'm not seeing it. I'm going to wait a little bit, but you can see for attendance, there are some specific requirements where you need to do it at least once a month, not when it pop. There you go. Good job, Elena. Thank you. Right. Periods of participation and federal reporting. We use that 90-day rule. That is, if students go 90 or more days without attendance, they're automatically exited. The reason why that matters is those that are automatically exited receive that employment and earnings survey. So bottom line is, if you don't do attendance at least once a month, you're going to get what I call false positives. And you're going to get a lot of students that get exited just because you're doing a lousy job collecting attendance. If that happens, you can't undo it. It just means the student's going to get that survey and you've officially wasted the student's time. They shouldn't get it, but they didn't have hours, so they're exited. So they're going to get it whether they like it or not, or whether you like it or not. So the requirement is to get attendance in at least once a month, whether you're scanning it, whether you're manually entering it, or whether you're doing third-party import-export. Either way, make sure to get attendance in at least once a month so you don't get people exited that shouldn't be exited. Okay, we've talked a lot about updates. There used to be ways where you would govern your exiters on the update. That now matters like not at all. So don't mark progress, don't mark status. Those are now obsolete fields. People feel like that makes the update irrelevant, but I'll say the update overall is still relevant, but it really is just all about the outcomes, which is update field 9. All that other stuff is way less important, but outcomes more important than ever. And yes, I will. Good job, Laura Lee. I'll just say, yeah, if you're in a college, you're using that MIS. We do have files in place to be able to bring in data from the college system. 5 years ago, there were a lot of people doing it. I'm not sure if there's a lot of people doing it now. I'll just say the problem from my TE bias point of view is at the colleges, you have those systems, maybe it's Banner, maybe it's PeopleSoft, whatever. So we've got those files for Banner and PeopleSoft, just like we do for K-12 systems like Aries or ASAP or Schoolhouse or whatever. But the thing is, at the colleges, it's usually really customized. So that is the PeopleSoft that they're using at San Diego is nothing like the PeopleSoft they're using in LA, for example. It's all customized. So there's a lot of onus on each individual college to make sure that that import-export accounts for all that extra customization that they did at the college level. So back in 16, 17, when we were working on this a lot, I will admit that did get in the way and I think did cause a lot of frustration. But back to your direct question, Laura Lee, the answer is yes, it is possible to bring data in from Banner PeopleSoft. Okay, and then here's that same thing about attendance. So we do have a CAEP dictionary. It's on that Casas California accountability page. Same page as where you can get the WIOA data dictionary, the order guide, and those many, many different attachments. This is up here at the top. It's showing the breadcrumb trail of where to find it. You CAEP agencies now, like WIOA 2, doing the quarterly data submission, like WIOA 2, using that TE quarterly data submission wizard. I think this has been a big success. That is, you just use that wizard and it takes care of your CAEP data, your CAEP DIR, your WIOA data, and your WIOA DIR all in one fell swoop. You just run that wizard every quarter and it takes care of everything. If your issue is with using it in TE, there's a link that just gives you some TE step-by-step help on how to use that wizard. We also have the employment and earnings survey. That's also, it's a different wizard, but it's also just using a wizard in TE. There's more documents we have there. I always like to reference my colleague, Nicole. She had the brilliant idea 3 years ago to create separate documents for each quarter. Got to say, up to that time, this was a big hot mess. once Nicole figured out that we just need a different document for each quarter, it pretty much solved everything. So I'll just say, here's the link by quarter where you can get TE help on how to run that employment and earnings survey wizard. I'll just say, hey, Mandalee, hey, I'm not sure TAP knows this yet, so it's going to require some TAP CASAS collaboration. This is just Jay's been too lazy to follow up with you and nothing else, but we're hoping to schedule a training on Wednesday, March 8th. That's exactly 1 month from now on the employment and earnings survey. You've heard a lot of us talk on the WIOA side about all these federal goals and all these big problems. What we really see as a #1 priority is with some of these CAEP only agencies. We know if you're funded for CAEP, but not WIOA 2, this is a lot newer to you than it is to WIOA 2. So we know the confusion level is much higher. So we plan to do a really basic level session on the employment and earnings survey with lots of extra special tender love and care to those agencies that are CAEP only funded. Again, Wednesday, March the 8th. Hopefully that works out for TAP. I'll admit, because Jay's done a lousy job of following up with TAP, that, hey, it might well be a different date because, hey, TAP is occupied and Jay was late to the party. So admittedly, we might have to adjust that date a little, but that's what we're looking at for information there. Thank you, Mandalee. Yes, this is me, kind of backsiding you without giving you a heads up at all. I'm trying to be as explicit with that as possible. Anyway, here's the calendar. The calendar on CAEP is the same as WIOA 2, including the infamous July 15th end of year deadline. Everybody hates it. I'll say that's a change by popular demand. Nobody believes me. But what everybody said is, yeah, we hate that early deadline. But the only thing we hate worse is having CAEP have the deadline be different than WIOA 2. We'd rather it be all the same. So everybody's on July 15th. Okay, and I think I better pull the plug here because if I get into CAEP's reports, that's 20 minutes we don't have. What I'll say though is I'll get you an opportunity to push back a lot. We've got CAEP TAP here, so I'll definitely work to intervene. We could certainly do another training with you Northern California agencies. Gotta say, participation is an A++ as far as I'm concerned. We got a great turnout. This is exactly what Jody was hoping would happen. This is exactly what I was hoping would happen. So I gotta say on that front, I think we're gonna be declaring victory on this, but admittedly, man, Jay just never stops talking. Way too long, ran over. I gotta say though, I don't know what I would cut because we did have some discussion here. If I did it all over again, I just would have bitten the bullet and given us an extra half hour. But anyway, let us know through chat, send me an email, send Jody an email, send TAP an email. If you feel like we need to do a follow-up on this. I think Jody was talking about at her regional meetings, hey, maybe we need to do something in person. We kind of decided it would be a little too, we've been trying to get everybody in person. Some of you in Bakersfield and San Jose. I think you'd back me up. The in-person trainings were great, or at least that's what they're saying. Maybe if I leave the room, then everybody's talking more like this about it. Who knows? But everybody's saying things are wonderful about the in-person. It would be great to do an in-person for this group as well. Gotta say, when we looked at it, though, we didn't really see it as being that realistic, just because you're so far-flung geographically, but we certainly could look at trying to do something in person at a central location, doing it for a full day or something like that, and really rolling up our sleeves. I'll just say we're not going to do that unless the interest is there and we know people will show up. And I'll just say, Lauralee, I know that you're a prominent far Northern California participant. What specific community are you from? Sorry, I forgot. Yolo County, is that? Okay, that's on.
Sutter County.
Thank you, On. So On is saying Yolo County. That's Woodland, right? Right, On.
Yeah.
And then Lauralee, you're Sutter County. So that's the county directly north of Yolo, correct?
Calusa's directly north of Yolo, but Sutter, we're a little bit to the east.
Okay. All right,
Well, we do touch part of Yolo County, so
all right.
yeah.
I've
Shannon
gotta
is
get better at my
suggesting
inland
Reading.
County's geography. South, I know my inland county's geography
Yeah.
pretty darn well.
Yeah,
But
we would
Shannon
be-
north,
is
I don't know it as
suggesting Reading, and I've heard that there has been an in-person in Reading in the past, so that might, if we could all come together on a location that all could attend, or many could attend, that's the challenge for us. So letting us know how far you can and would be able to drive to get to one central location, let me know. I put my email address and Jay's in the chat so you can connect with us as well.
Yeah. If we could get the same fanfare, it would be good, because I think for some of these basic requirements, online is just as good. So knowing that you've got a due date on April 30th, you can learn that online every bit as well as you can learn it in person. But when we start troubleshooting and identifying problems, sometimes that's where the in-person meeting is a little better.
Yes.
Oh,
All right, thank you. I'm sure you'd all say, mercifully, I'm gonna finally finish. I will make sure, however, that Mandalee gets a chance to close it up. Sorry, she thought I'd never ask.
no, thank you, Jay. Everyone, including myself, and I know Holly, we always learn something every time you present. So we really appreciate your time. Everyone for staying a little bit over. We have had a chance to pop into the chat the evaluation link, which we really would appreciate it if you just take a few extra moments. That really does inform how we are able to plan out our PD calendar, bringing back Jay. If this is something that you do want in person, Jody and Jay's email has been posted in the chat. If you didn't get it, now's your time to go ahead and save your chat. So you can just click those 3 dots in your chat box and save the chat to your desktop, as well as just go ahead emailing us at tap@caladeled.org. So with that, we're going to go ahead
And I
close
will add, because I did run over and got long-winded, whatever, I think I probably did a lousier job than usual on the chat, so I'll take a look. I think there probably are a few questions I missed, so Tap and I will double back and figure out a way to deal with it.
Sure will. Okay, everyone, have a good afternoon. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Jody, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Bye.